Hey, 42 here. In 1919, a young, ambitious 30-year-old stood in a beer hall in Munich, Germany, and gave a passionate speech about politics to 111 attendees. Only 4 months later, the same young man gave another speech, but this time, due to word of mouth, his audience had grown to over 2,000 people. A few months later, he gave another speech with 6,000 devotees in attendance. This is how revolutions begin. That ambitious young man went on to change the world beyond recognition by committing countless atrocities against the human race and attempting genocide. Yes, I am talking about Adolf Hitler. Do not take my words as praise, but there is no doubt that Hitler's oration abilities are unrivaled throughout history. His ability to persuade others and bring them into his cause and align their ideals with his own were powerful beyond belief. During one 2-hour speech in 1920, he was completely interrupted 58 times by thundering applause and cheers from the crowd. But was Adolf Hitler a great leader? Absolutely not. Effective, maybe, but great, no. As humans with a conscience, we define great as doing good. Therefore, a great leader must use their power and influence for good, not evil as Hitler did. But besides the obvious deplorable reasons that Hitler was not a great leader, he wasn't actually good at leading. Let me explain. Hitler was a fantastic orator. He gave speeches so powerful, so intense, they made you forget your own morals and follow him into a genocidal abyss. He was extremely effective at collecting followers and power. But being able to rally hearts and minds is only one half of being a great leader. For once Hitler had that power, he was hopeless at putting it to use, at least when you compare him to his wartime competition. A truly great leader in Hitler's position of immense power would have leveraged Germany's strengths and turned wartime Germany into a true superpower, a force to be reckoned with. And a true leader could have done so without ever going to war, using only diplomacy and leverage. But alas, Hitler was too consumed by his own hate and pride. His deep hatred of Jews, communists and others caused him to get distracted by and drawn into many futile conflicts that were completely unnecessary and only hindered Germany's overall strength, such as Stalingrad. He was more concerned with destroying his neighbouring countries and focusing on the strengths of his own Germany. These are certainly not the traits of a great leader, just a passionate, angry fool. Are you passionate about something, but tired of feeling like a fool? I'd like to take a minute to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of classes in design, business, technology and more. Premium membership gives you unlimited access to high quality classes on must-know topics so you can improve your skills, unlock new opportunities and do the work you love. If you're thinking of starting a business or want to start a new project with other people, then you'll need to become a great leader yourself. Some of the greatest leaders in history have also been the greatest orators. Barack Obama, Winston Churchill, Martin Luther King, to name but a few. And to sharpen up your public speaking skills, I can't recommend highly enough the Skillshare course, Presentation Essentials, how to share ideas that inspire action. And good news, if you're one of the first 1,000 people to use the promo link in a description, you will get your first 2 months of Skillshare Premium for just 99 cents. After that, Skillshare is more affordable than most learning platforms out there, at only $10 per month. Click the link in the description to check out Simon Sinek's course and thousands of others, but remember only the first 1,000 people will get 2 months for 99 cents. Speaking of Winston Churchill, Hitler's wartime opponent is thought of as one of history's most powerful leaders, but unlike Hitler, many people go as far as to call Churchill a great leader. So what's the difference? Is Churchill only a great leader and Hitler is not because Churchill was fighting for good, not evil? Well, that certainly helps, but it's the reason why Churchill was fighting for good which made him a truly great leader. And that reason as a great empathy for his people. Hitler's motivation for going to war was occupation of neighbouring countries to expand the German Empire and his idea of a pure race, and also genocide. I don't need to tell you that these are selfish reasons. Hitler's powerful oration may have tricked millions into believing that he had the German people's best interests in mind. But in truth, his motivations were not only selfish but driven by delusions, insecurities, and mental insanity. Churchill's motivations were the polar opposite. He went to war to defend his people and his country from the tyranny of evil. He had no desire to invade and capture other lands or to enslave and murder innocent people. Psychologists have long studied what it takes to be a great leader, and they have all converged on one key quality that every great leader from history shared. One mental attribute that separates Churchill from Hitler, and that is emotional intelligence. It is not intellect, cunning, or physical prowess that makes a great leader. It is emotional intelligence. That is the ability to sympathise with others, to know how people think, behave, and how they will react given any situation. What made Abraham Lincoln such a great leader, such an icon, respected throughout the ages? How was he able to overcome the tremendous challenges in abolishing slavery? Well, quite simply, he possessed more emotional intelligence than his enemies. Whilst the plantation owners and leaders of the Confederacy were only concerned with monetary gain from their slaves, Lincoln was able to sympathise with the plight of the slaves. He could humanise them, and this gave him the drive, the passion, the motivation to put every fibre of himself into his quest to set them free. And that he did. Hitler may have been an extremely intelligent man, an incredible orator and powerfully persuasive, but he had not a scrap of emotional intelligence. He had no sympathy. No man who did the things that he did could possess these qualities. But Churchill, despite his image as a pragmatic bulldog, did. And that is why he led Britain and the world to victory. But being a great leader isn't just about being able to make the correct decision. A truly great leader must also be able to make the hardest decision of all, when it is most needed of them, no matter the cost. On the 10th of May 1940, Winston Churchill was appointed Prime Minister of Great Britain. On the very same day, Hitler launched a huge invasion of France, occupying vast swathes of the country. Before long, Hitler's army had occupied Paris and forced the nation of France to surrender. When Churchill heard that France was prepared to surrender and make a peace deal with Hitler, he knew that if the Nazis were to get their hands on France's navy, which at the time was the second most powerful in the world after Britain's, then Britain would be screwed. Sure, Britain's navy was powerful, but with the combined might of France's navy and Germany's U-boats, Britain would have been Hitler's for the taking. And worse yet, if Hitler took Britain and its navy, the rest of the world would have stood no chance against the spread of Hitler's tyranny. With all that combined military might, he could have taken the US with ease, and today the world would be under Nazi rule. Simply because Hitler got his hands on a few French warships. Churchill could absolutely not let this happen. Initially, he wrote to the US President, FDR, and asked if he could borrow 50 of their older warships to defend Britain in the event that Hitler did take France's navy. But FDR was too concerned with winning the upcoming election, and so denied Churchill's request. Even after Churchill wrote back to him explaining that if Britain was taken, then America would be next. The French admiral had already made a promise to Churchill that if the Nazis did ever try to take France's warships, then the French would sabotage their own ships, rendering them useless to Hitler. It sounds fair enough, but Churchill was too pragmatic to rely solely on the French disabling their own ships, and so he formulated a grand plan called Operation Catapult. The most daring and most morally difficult plan that Churchill had so far enacted. France's vast navy was spread out in fleets around the world, so Churchill planned to use espionage, stealth, and if necessary, force, to capture all of France's warships and relocate them to British waters. So, on the 3rd of July 1940, Operation Catapult was launched, and simultaneous takeovers of every French Navy vessel took place within a few hours around the globe. Bearing in mind that until now France was Britain's closest ally during the war, this must have been a horrendously difficult decision for Churchill to make. But the decision that he had to make in just a few hours' time would be many times more difficult. In fact, it would be the most difficult, the most heart-wrenching decision that the Prime Minister would make his entire life. A decision that many historians have since said was one of the biggest turning points of the war and changed the fate of the world. You see, all but one of the fleets within the French Navy could be taken with little effort by simply sneaking British servicemen on board and putting a gun up to the captain. But one fleet, the most powerful and most heavily guarded within France's navy, would not be so simple. In the harbour of Mers el-Kébir in French Algeria, France had moored their 4 largest and most powerful ships, the Britannia, Provence, Strasbourg and Dunkirk, as well as some smaller destroyers. If Hitler got his hands on just this fleet alone, it would spell the end of the war for Britain and the world. Churchill wrote an ultimatum to the French admiral and sent out a fleet of the Royal Navy's most powerful vessels to deliver it to the French fleet at Mers el-Kébir. It gave France just 6 hours from receiving the letter to sail their large fleet of warships to Britain or America and surrender them to the British Navy. Otherwise, the British Navy would, regrettably, sink them using force. The Royal Navy surrounded the French fleet and a long, intense standoff wore on for many hours as the French admiral refused to peacefully surrender their ships to the British, their allies. The French admiral was annoyed that Churchill obviously didn't trust his promise that the French Navy would destroy their own ships if the Nazis tried to take them. He was also annoyed that a lower-ranking member of the Royal Navy was sent to deliver Churchill's ultimatum to him instead of someone higher up in the command. He also didn't quite believe that the British would actually fire upon them if they refused to hand over the ships. So, with the French admiral remaining stubborn, the two supposedly allied nations stood gun to gun across the harbour in a Mexican standoff. A few hours later, the French admiral called on nearby backup just in case the British did decide to open fire. But the British soon caught wind of this approaching backup, and so the captain sent a telegram informing Churchill of the upcoming French backup only minutes away. Churchill was suddenly weighed down by his worst fear, that it would have to come to this. The possibility of ordering the British to shoot upon their own allies. With little time to think, he sent back a short, sharp reply: settle matters quickly. And that was it, knowing full well what that might entail. Regrettably, the British fleet knew what they had to do next, as Churchill had briefed them beforehand. Yet, the British signalled the French ship once more, giving them one last warning: come to an agreement within 30 minutes or we will open fire. At 5:54 PM, no agreement had been reached. And, sure enough, the British pointed their cannons at the French vessels and began to fire. The Royal Navy fleet that day consisted of battleships HMS Valiant and HMS Resolution, an aircraft carrier and several destroyers. But at the helm of the fleet was the Royal Navy's most powerful weapon, HMS Hood, the largest and most powerful warship in the world at that time. Completely unmatched by any other ship, her huge turrets fired relentlessly upon the French battleships, sinking one of them and completely destroying the others within minutes. 1,297 French servicemen lost their lives that day at the hands of the British, supposedly their closest ally. Whilst the British public and government were entirely supportive of Churchill's decision when they found out what had happened, many others around the world, obviously in France, were both critical and upset at Britain's actions that day, seeing it as a betrayal. Now, it could be argued that Churchill's move to sink the French Navy was over the top and rash, or perhaps evil, but one has to consider what the other outcome would have been. If Hitler had got his hands on those French battleships, it is entirely possible that the entire world, not just Britain, would be under Nazi rule today. It is reported that when word got back to Churchill in London about what had happened in Mers-el-Kabir and how many French servicemen had been killed, Churchill was physically sick and broke down in tears. Whether you agree with Operation Catapult or not, no one can argue how incomprehensibly difficult a decision of that magnitude must have been for Churchill, or any other leader for that matter. Churchill sacrificed over 1,000 of Britain's closest allies that day to save the British people and potentially save the world from the tyranny of evil. A horrible decision to make with irreparable consequences. But if that's not true leadership, then I don't know what is. Winston Churchill was recently voted by the British public as the greatest Briton of all time. And sure, it's tremendously easy to see how he was a great leader. He stared pure evil in the face when the rest of his cabinet wanted to surrender. He led Britain and Western Europe through its darkest hour. He was a master of the English language and used it to inspire and uplift the morale of the British people. But how come there are some leaders today that are considered by their people as great, whilst the rest of the world can only see the opposite? It used to be that good and evil was so black and white. You would look at the world stage and the vast differences between the goodies and the baddies, and it was laid out bare for all to see. But today, our leaders are becoming ever more grey, treading a thin line between good and evil. Leaders such as Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un are so polarising yet so murky. Sure, leaders have always had supporters and detractors, but in today's information world, it's so easy to find out why supposedly bad leaders do the things that they do, instead of relying on the propaganda. And with nobody is the balance between good and evil more murkier, harder to understand, than with Vladimir Putin. You cannot talk about great leaders without talking about supposedly the most powerful man in the world, Putin. For nobody is more loved by their own people. Okay, maybe Kim Jong-un is, but under entirely different circumstances, let's say. Every single week, an army of pollsters traverses the 11 different time zones of Russia and knocks on the doors of every single house in the country asking their opinion of Vladimir Putin. According to these polls, Vladimir Putin's approval rating by his own people is a staggering 83%, and that has not dropped below 80% since 2014. And these numbers aren't artificially inflated by the Kremlin. Several independent Western polling companies have done similar polls and always arrive around the same number. To put that into perspective, Trump's approval rating is half of that at 40%, Theresa May's is around 43%, and Angela Merkel's is around 50%, at the time of writing this video. But how can this be? Doesn't most of the West view Putin as a bad guy or a troublemaker at the very least? And it's easy to see why that is. Putin has done some rather questionable and immoral things, including annexing Crimea, waging a war on the LGBT community. He is suspected of having critics and political enemies killed. And the most questionable act of all, he is of course rumoured to have used hacking campaigns and propaganda to make Trump president. But no matter how much Western politicians and Western media demonises him, his approval ratings within motherland Russia just keep increasing with time. To appreciate why, we have to understand the vast difference in culture between Russia and the West. Russians respect strength. Whilst Western Europeans may have ideals such as fair democracy, social equality and justice, it is ingrained within the Russian culture to never show weakness. Russians strive for the solidification and strengthening of their own nation. They have a great respect for Russia, and any president who can make Russia appear to be strong and not a pushover on the world stage is no doubt going to be popular. Putin does exactly that. The propaganda released from the Kremlin is carefully curated to always show Putin in positions of strength, in manly pursuits like fishing topless, hunting topless, and riding a horse, topless. There seems to be a theme here. These are not candid holiday snaps, these are carefully curated to show Putin in his best and strongest light. He appears formidable and able to take on whatever the West throws at him. Putin may not play so nicely on the global stage, but whether you sympathise with Putin's methods of politics or not, he is in his own way, for the Russian people at least, a great leader. Leaders come in many forms. Throughout history, some have led us into the darkest abyss. Others have led us to victory. But one thing that all great leaders do is bring about change within the world and leave their own unique footprint on the future. Sometimes for the best, sometimes for the worst. So wherever you are in the world, when the time next comes for you to choose a leader, make your choice worthwhile. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then please click here to support me on Patreon. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe, and I'd just like to thank Skillshare one more time for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check them out by clicking the link in the description.